Before we dive into today's mystery, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps us keep uncovering the unknown. Now, let's begin. Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Even the town's name feels like an omen. It sounds like a place where secrets fester, where the truth is too horrific to face, and where consequences come far too late. It was a quiet desert town, the kind of place where neighbors smiled at each other at the grocery store, where strangers waved as they drove past. But what no one realized was that one of their own, David Parker Ray, was hiding something beyond their worst nightmares. For years, women had been disappearing. Some were drifters, others were prostitutes, and some were just unlucky enough to cross paths with the wrong man. The authorities never made much of it. This was, after all, a transit area. People came and went. Some left without saying goodbye. But there was a pattern, one that no one pieced together in time. And hidden in the middle of this sleepy town, behind the door of an unassuming white trailer, was hell on earth. Imagine waking up in a place you don't recognize. Your head is pounding. Your wrists and ankles are restrained. Your skin is raw from metal chains that bite into your flesh every time you move. You try to scream, but the sound is swallowed by the suffocating silence of the room. And then you look around. The walls are covered in chains, whips, saws, syringes, and surgical tools. There are diagrams, horrific illustrations of what's about to be done to you. A mirror looms above, forcing you to watch. And then the tape recorder clicks on. A cold, monotone voice speaks. "Hello there, bitch. You're probably wondering why you're here. What's happening to you? Well, let me explain. You've been chosen to be a sex slave. And if you follow my rules, you might live long enough to be let go." David Parker Ray called this place his toy box. But this was no ordinary toy box. This was a specially designed, soundproof torture chamber, a $100,000 nightmare on wheels filled with instruments pain. Here, he carried out the kind of cruelty that seemed too grotesque for reality, but it was real. He was meticulous. Everything was planned. He kept a log of victims, recorded his sessions, and even practiced psychological conditioning. Sometimes he didn't just torture. He tried to erase their memories. His methods were so chillingly advanced that many of his victims, if they were ever freed, wouldn't even remember what had happened to them. Some say he let a few go, just to see if they'd come back for him. They never did. And many, they were never seen again. Most serial killers hunt in the moment, driven by impulse, need, or rage. But not David Parker Ray. He was different. He was calculated. He was patient. He had prepared for everything. Even the moment when his victims woke up, instead of introducing himself in person, he let them wake up to his voice on a tape recorder. By the time you hear this, you'll be naked, shackled, and gagged. Don't bother screaming. No one can hear you. The tape played out like a scripted horror movie, except this was no movie. It was real, and he had done this so many times. He knew exactly how it would go. For the next few days, you'll be subjected to pain and pleasure. You're here to satisfy me. You will obey. If you resist, I will hurt you in ways you cannot imagine. And he meant it. Ray had designed his torture sessions. He was an engineer of suffering, crafting every detail to maximize fear and pain. The recordings weren't just for the victims. They were also trophies, a reminder of his control. It was methodical. It was rehearsed. And worst of all, it worked. How does a monster blend into everyday life? David Parker Ray wasn't the type to drag screaming women into his truck in broad daylight. He wasn't reckless. He was smart. Too smart. His victims were chosen carefully. Runaways, sex workers, hitchhikers, women with no one looking for them. And sometimes he didn't even have to hunt alone. Ray had accomplices. His girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, helped lure victims. She would act friendly, gain their trust, and lead them right into his trap. Once they were inside the house or the trailer, it was over. There was no way out. By the time they realized something was wrong, the door was locked, the chains were on, and the tape recorder was playing. Most serial killers kill quickly. Not David Parker Ray. For him, death wasn't the goal. Control was. The toy box wasn't just a place of physical torment. It was a place designed to break minds. He used drugs like sodium pentothal and phenobarbital, not to kill, but to erase memories. His victims would wake up confused, groggy, unsure what was real. He experimented. He tested how much pain the human body could endure before breaking. And the worst part? He convinced some of them that he would eventually let them go. That if they obeyed, if they did everything he said, they might walk away. And some did. But they were never the same. The desert is a perfect place to make someone disappear. For decades, women had vanished from towns near Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, but no one thought much of it. Some were runaways, other sex workers, the type of people society ignores. And that's exactly why David Parker Ray hunted them. But here's the terrifying part. No bodies were ever found. Authorities believe he killed as many as 60 women, maybe more. He documented his victims, kept trophies, even recorded his torture sessions. But the corpses? They were gone. There are theories. Some believe he buried them in shallow desert graves, hidden beneath the endless sand dunes. Others think he dismembered them, scattering remains so no one would ever piece together the crime. And then there was Elephant Butte Lake. Just a few miles from Ray's home, the lake was deep, murky, and eerily quiet. He owned a boat, and some suspect he dumped bodies into the water, way down so they'd never resurface. In 1999, after his arrest, divers searched the lake. They found leg shackles and chains, but no bodies. Did the desert swallow his victims whole? Or did he have an accomplice still out there, making sure they were never found? To this day, we don't know. David Parker Ray was untouchable for years. He knew how to pick victims who wouldn't be missed. He brainwashed them, tortured them until they didn't remember, and left no evidence behind. But in 1999, he made one mistake. He underestimated a woman named Cynthia Vigil. It started like so many others. She was a prostitute in Albuquerque, just trying to survive. A man approached her, middle-aged, polite, seemed harmless, and offered $20 for a quick session. She got into his RV, and that was the last thing she remembered before waking up in the toy box. Cynthia woke up naked, chained, and surrounded by instruments of torture. The room smelled of rusted metal and dried blood. Her head pounded. Her wrists throbbed from the tight shackles digging into her skin. Then the tape recorder clicked on. "You are now my property." The voice said, "Follow my rules and you may live." Cynthia was tough. She had been through hell before. But nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen. For 3 days, Ray and his girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, tortured her. Electrocution, whips, surgical tools. Every time she screamed, they laughed. They were careful, methodical, patient. Ray took pleasure in breaking people, in making them beg. But Cynthia? She wasn't going to beg. On the 3rd day, Ray left for work. Cindy Hendy was in charge of watching the victim. Then a miracle. Hendy left the keys to the shackles on a table, and she walked away. Cynthia's heart was pounding. She reached out with her bloodied fingers, grabbed the keys, and started unlocking herself. But then, Cindy Hendy walked back in. Hendy lunged at her, but Cynthia fought like hell. She smashed a lamp over Hendy's head, grabbed an ice pick, and stabbed her in the neck. Hendy screamed, blood pouring from the wound. But Cynthia didn't stop running. Naked, covered in bruises and blood, a metal chain still hanging from her neck, she burst out of the trailer and into the desert sun. She ran for miles until she reached a house. She pounded on the door, screaming for help. When the neighbor opened the door, they gasped in horror. And then they called 911. The Sierra County Police Department had seen some disturbing things before, but nothing like this. The call came in around 3 p.m. A woman had been found, naked, battered, shaking, with a metal collar around her neck. She was incoherent, sobbing, rambling about a toy box. Deputies rushed to the scene. When they saw Cynthia Vigil, their stomachs dropped. They had never seen terror like this in someone's eyes. She clung to the officer like a lifeline, gasping, "He's still out there. He's still got others." And that was the moment they knew this was bigger than they ever imagined. Police had no idea what they were walking into when they raided David Parker Ray's trailer. They expected to find a crime scene. Instead, they found a house of horrors. When officers forced open the trailer door, the smell of metal, sweat, and fear hung in the air. And then they saw it, a gynecological chair, positioned under a mirror, so victims were forced to watch their own torture. Chains, handcuffs, gags, surgical tools, and then the audio tapes. Hundreds of them. Recordings of David Parker Ray torturing women. One officer vomited on the spot. Another had to step outside, shaking. And on a table near the chair, they found a book, a diary of victims. Names, dates, details of what he had done to them. And the worst part? Most of the names weren't Cynthia's, which meant there were dozens more. Women who had never escaped. Women who were still missing. David Parker Ray wasn't working alone. Once police arrested his girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, she immediately broke. She spilled everything. How Ray had been doing this for decades. How he had killed more than anyone knew. And how, sometimes, he would let victims go after wiping their memories. She told police about the drugs, the mind games, the bodies that were never found. Then, another shock. David Parker Ray's own daughter, Jessie Ray, was involved. She had helped lure women into the toy box. She knew everything, and she never stopped him. David Parker Ray had spent decades torturing women, and for years he got away with it. But after Cynthia Vigil's daring escape, everything changed. When police searched his property, they found the toy box, the diary of victims, and something even more terrifying, a collection of videotapes. These tapes weren't just recordings. They were evidence of pure evil. Detectives forced themselves to watch. They had to. They needed to identify the victims, to build a case strong enough to convict him. What they saw, women crying, screaming, begging. Some were too broken to fight back. Others had been drugged, unable to even understand what was happening. But one thing was clear. Many of these women were never seen again. Ray had been so careful. No bodies, no obvious proof of murder. But detectives knew the truth. They were dealing with a serial killer. The only question was, could they prove it? Even with overwhelming evidence, convicting David Parker Ray wasn't easy. There were no bodies, no clear DNA proof of murder. His defense team argued that the women had been willing participants, that they had agreed to the torture as part of a twisted fantasy. And disturbingly, some of the victims had no memory of what happened. Ray had drugged them, erased their memories, conditioned them to doubt themselves. But then, Cynthia Vigil took the stand. Her testimony was harrowing. She relived every moment. The chains, the torture, the moment she finally escaped. Then, another survivor came forward, Angelica Montano. She, too, had been in the toy box. She had survived. And now, she was ready to tell the world what he had done to her. With multiple survivors testifying, the jury could no longer ignore the truth. The verdict was in. David Parker Ray was convicted. The judge sentenced him to 224 years in prison. For decades, he had inflicted pain beyond imagination. And now, finally, he would rot behind bars. His girlfriend and accomplice, Cindy Hendy, got 36 years in prison after testifying against him. His own daughter, Jessie Ray, was sentenced to 9 years for helping him kidnap victims. For the first time, it seemed like justice had been served. But then, fate played a cruel trick. David Parker Ray was set to spend the rest of his life behind bars. But just 1 year into his sentence, in 2002, he died of a heart attack. He never spent a single day in general population. He never faced the true horror of prison justice, the kind that would have made him feel just a fraction of the fear he inflicted on his victims. He escaped real punishment. And worst of all, he never revealed the locations of his victims' bodies. Even in death, he took his darkest secrets to the grave. David Parker Ray is dead. His toy box is gone. His accomplices are behind bars. But the terror? It still lingers. To this day, bodies have never been found. Families of missing women still wonder, was my daughter one of his victims? Some believe he had more accomplices, that someone helped him cover up the murders, and that person is still out there. And the most chilling thought? What if he wasn't the only one? What if right now someone else is carrying on his legacy, using his tapes, his methods, his depraved ideas? Because in the darkest corners of the world, monsters like David Parker Ray don't just die. They inspire others. And sometimes the horror never truly ends.